the metaphysical, metaphoric language of the various channels and chakras, dantians, koshas, layers, auric layers, etc. All of that terminology comes from subjective experience of meditators, deep breathers, energy workers, who are going within their own bodily experience and beyond, and categorizing it through the subtle experiences of the five senses. Chakra colors correspond to the wavelength of light that is projected by the brain when certain areas of the body are more active and dynamic. The lower you go in the body, the longer the wavelength becomes, because the longer the distance of the nerves becomes from the actual visual cortex. So feedback coming up from the body when the eyes are closed will come up as red phosphenes behind the eyes. You can look up the Wikipedia entry on phosphenes later on and get a sense of what that is. About 80% of people, as they do this kind of practice, will start to see flickers of different colors behind their closed eyes. If you're part of the 20%, don't worry. It has nothing to do with your ability to be successful with the practice. It just has to do with how your brain is wired. I've had plenty of people who are deeply successful who barely see anything when they go through internal processes. Instead, they feel, or they hear, or they get other sensory feedback, and that's perfectly fine. As you go higher in the body, you get smaller and smaller wavelengths. These experiences are also associated with how the body resonates with external environment. So for instance, if you go into a dance club and there's heavy bass music or bass drum that is pounding, or if you're in a classical symphony and there's a big timpani being struck, boom, 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 you'll feel the resonance in your buttocks, in your legs, in the base of your pelvis and abdomen. And if you closed your eyes and you happen to be one of the people that tends to see little flickers of phosphenes, you'll see flashes of red every time that the drum beat hits your body. If, on the other hand, you were, say, at a Western wedding and they're playing a string ensemble, Pachelbel's Canon or Bach's Air, you might see green phosphenes begin to flicker as the string instruments resonate through the chest region of your body. The sound resonance is literally triggering sensory neurons and motor neurons, the tactile neurons, and they're going up into the brain, and part of them is actually giving feedback through the visual cortex, which is feeding back as if you are seeing flickers of green. If you're listening to a Pink Floyd guitar solo and your eyes are closed, you might see little flickers or shots of purple flashes because the electric guitar, the tone of the electric guitar, has a resonant frequency up in the top of the head. So our external senses, sound, tactile sense, visual sense, are also interlinked with all of these phenomena of consciousness that allow us to sort of tell what's going on in terms of subtle energy sensations and the like. So for those of you who are more science-based, know that my background originally is hard sciences, and I found it sort of hard to stomach people talking about auras and stuff like that at one point, until people who had both a background in science and metaphysics would point out exactly how the human eye can perceive such things and what they are. And then I stopped being quite so arrogant and recognized that metaphysics is a subjective languaging to actually give us access to experiences that are inherently subjective because they're within the body. They're not something that's being measured by a meter. That said, know, if you are more science-based, hard science, that some of these things can be measured. The body is, of course, an electrical organism. It's mostly fluid, and the fluid carries charged particles, ions, through three major groups of pathways. One is through the capillary blood system, hormones, and of course, hemoglobin, oxygen, etc., that is being carried by the blood are all charged particles. The charges are used to move them across cell membranes, and you get fluxes of charge moving through the blood flow. In many people, it's moving just through the arteries and veins and through some minimal amount of the capillaries because there's a lot of tension either in the fascia, the connective tissue of the body from stress, or in the viscera themselves. The organs themselves are not getting as much blood flow as they could because of various life habits. And so the blood is backed up like a traffic jam through capillaries that are being constricted by tension around them. And we don't get quite as much of that energy flow, if you will, through that pathway. So part of what we'll be doing in this practice is opening up those pathways. In addition, we have the blood pathways. We also have the nerve pathways, which is electrical signal moving and firing across synapses and moving along liquid-filled nerve pathways. And we also have the meridian system. Meridian system is basically the movement of charged particles through what's called in Western science, in biology and physiology, the extracellular matrix, the interstitial fluids of the body that flow in and amongst internal organs. The more that the fascia is dynamic and open and moving with our muscle movements, that's the connective tissue that runs between the muscles, between the organs, that holds the organs in place and suspends them from the rib cage. The more that the fascia is capable of moving rhythmically, the more that fluid moves between the layers of fascia, carrying charged particles back and forth to the cells. The interstitial fluids, the extracellular matrix, are crucial from a science standpoint in that every time that capillary blood carries oxygen or other substances to the borders of cells and organs, they get released from the ends of the capillaries into the interstitial fluid, into the extracellular matrix, travel across a small amount of that, and then go into the membranes of the cells of the organs. So it's a part of the flow of all of these experiences. And the more clogged it is with waste materials, meaning metabolic wastes from the cells that haven't been flushed out properly by the kidneys and by the liver, the less that we get a proper signal moving through the body, and the more that we get frictional heat, literal heat, metabolic waste heat, which we experience as inflammation. So, again, things that we will be working with in order to allow the signal within the body to move to a greater extent involve deconstricting the fascia, getting it more mobile, working with the breath synchronously with body movements to actually move the sensation of oxygenated blood through the body, that energy sensation, and working with the various electrical signals of the nerves, the meridians, and the blood flow itself.